2022, Lake Mead revealed a body hidden underwater for decades, but that wasn't the real discovery. The real thing the lake exposed was that the American Southwest is running out of water, and by 2026, the entire system is approaching a breaking point. Right now, Lake Mead sits at roughly 1,050 feet above sea level, heading toward a level that would tie the record low set in 2022. The Bureau of Reclamation says it could keep falling for 2 more years, past anything ever recorded since the reservoir was first filled, a level this reservoir has never reached in its 90-year history. 25 million people depend on this lake. So what actually happens when a reservoir this size runs out of room to fall? Nobody noticed, until they had to. But the real reason Lake Mead is collapsing wasn't a single dry year, and it wasn't just climate change. It started almost 100 years ago, with a promise nobody could actually keep. Hoover Dam was finished in 1936, built by more than 5,000 workers pouring concrete in canyon heat that regularly passed 120 degrees. 96 of them never made it home. When it was done, the dam held back a lake so large it could supply every household in America for 13 years. It built the modern Southwest, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Los Angeles, cities that exist at their current size because one structure in the desert guaranteed them water and power. For decades, that guarantee looked unbreakable, but the real threat to that dam was never the desert heat. It was a piece of paper signed in 1922 when 7 states divided the Colorado River between them, using data from one of the wettest periods in its recorded history. They treated an unusually good decade as if it were normal, and signed a deal promising out more water than the river actually carries most years. Nobody in that room thought they were writing a 100-year-old mistake. They thought they were solving a problem forever. Which means every gallon drawn from Lake Mead for the last 20 years has been quietly spending a savings account that was never being refilled. So where does a region go when the account finally runs dry? The water kept falling. The promises didn't. The lake was last full in 1983. Since then, it has been dying in stages, losing another layer every year, until the summer of 2022, when the shoreline started giving up what it had been hiding. Sunken houseboats, a World War II-era landing craft, and that barrel, resting under the surface since long before most people watching this were even born. That was the moment the world noticed. But the lake had been sending warnings for years before that, quietly, to anyone who bothered to look at the numbers instead of the headlines. And in 2026, the decline sped up again. The winter of 2025 into 2026 brought the lowest mountain snowpack ever recorded across the Rockies. A March heat wave burned off what little snow remained before it could melt into the river. Upstream, Lake Powell began falling faster than any model expected, forcing federal officials into a choice that mattered more than most people realized: protect Powell's power supply or keep sending normal releases down to Mead. They chose to protect Powell. That single decision pulled nearly 1.5 million acre-feet out of what should have reached Lake Mead this year, enough water to supply millions of homes for an entire year, simply never arriving. Here's what that actually means on the ground. Think of it as a staircase heading down into the dark. Cross the first step, and Arizona loses part of its water. Cross the next, and the cuts double for Arizona and Nevada both. Cross another, and Hoover Dam's oldest turbines stop turning completely, cutting power to over 1 million homes overnight. Keep descending, and you reach a step where the dam can generate no electricity at all. Below that sits the final step, the one where the dam can no longer release water downstream at all. Not to Arizona, not to California, not to the farms in Mexico that feed millions of people. That step is called dead pool. It isn't a metaphor, it's an elevation, a specific physical number carved into an outlet pipe, not a figure of speech invented for a headline. Right now, the lake sits only about 150 feet above it. For a reservoir this size, that's not a lot of room left to fall. The federal government isn't standing still. In May 2026, the Bureau of Reclamation committed $52 million to replace 3 of Hoover Dam's original turbines with new ones engineered to keep spinning at water levels the old machinery was never built to survive. Once installed alongside the wide-head turbines already in place, they'll soften what would have been a catastrophic cut to the region's power supply into something merely severe. It's a genuine engineering achievement. It buys time. What it doesn't do is put a single gallon of water back into the lake. Nor does it change what utilities across 3 states will eventually have to charge regular families once the region's cheapest electricity keeps getting harder to generate. Hoover Dam's power has always been some of the lowest-cost electricity in the country. As output shrinks, that gap has to be filled from somewhere else, and it usually ends up on a bill nobody connects back to a lake 400 miles away. You can re-engineer a dam. You cannot re-engineer a river. No amount of funding changes what the river physically carries. It isn't only water and power disappearing with the shoreline. Lake Mead National Recreation Area draws millions of visitors every year, and as the water retreats, entire marinas have had to be towed and rebuilt closer to what's left of it. Boating routes that existed for decades simply don't exist anymore. For towns built around tourism on the lake, a falling shoreline isn't a statistic. It's the difference between a season with visitors and a season without them. So who's actually responsible for all of this? And this is where the real villain of this story finally comes into focus. It was never one bad year, one wasteful city, or one broken machine. It was a 100-year-old promise that outran the water supporting it, kept alive by 7 state governments that have spent 2 decades unable to agree on who gives up their share first. Every time the deadline arrives, someone asks for more time instead of an answer, and the lake never gets the luxury of waiting along with them. They missed their deadline for a new long-term agreement earlier this year. Some states want to leave more water in the system. Others won't sign on. A new deal is expected later this year, alongside threats of lawsuits if it collapses instead. Every round of talks ends the same way it started. 7 states, 1 shrinking lake, and no one willing to be the first to take less. The clock keeps running either way. Meanwhile, the lake keeps dropping while the meetings keep getting rescheduled. And on the ground, the cuts stopped being abstract a long time ago. Some farms that had been worked by the same family for generations now sit completely dry. Fields that used to grow cotton and alfalfa across Arizona have simply gone unplanted, season after season, with no real sign it's coming back. Entire small towns built around those farms have started shrinking along with them, because when the water disappears, the jobs disappear with it. California has avoided mandatory cuts entirely so far, protected by water rights senior enough that its reckoning hasn't arrived yet. But when it does, it will be the biggest water fight the American West has ever seen. And Mexico's Mexicali Valley, feeding millions of people under a treaty signed in 1944, has no backup plan at all if the river ever stops arriving. Its farmers didn't write the 1922 deal, weren't in the room for it, and still stand to lose everything because of it. What happens to a region that built its entire identity around water that was never really guaranteed? Then there's Las Vegas. Most people assume Las Vegas is the villain here. A city of fountains and golf courses in the middle of a desert, somehow still standing, while everyone else runs dry. It's the obvious answer. It's also the wrong one. Las Vegas uses only a small fraction of what Arizona and California draw combined, since farming alone consumes most of what the river carries. And for 20 years, while every other state argued, Las Vegas quietly built the most aggressive water survival system on the entire river. It started with grass. Homeowners were paid to rip out decorative lawns, saving more water from that single program than most American cities use in years. Then Vegas went further, treating almost everything used indoors and sending it straight back into the lake, so that even as the population grew by hundreds of thousands of people, total water use kept falling. No other city drawing from this river comes close to matching that kind of turnaround. But the boldest move happened underground, where nobody could see it. Starting in the 2000s, Las Vegas spent over $1.5 billion building a tunnel beneath the lake itself. Crews dug nearly 3 miles under an active reservoir, through unstable rock and flooded fault zones that could collapse without warning, to build an intake reaching water 20 feet below dead pool. Engineers who worked on it still call it one of the toughest jobs of their careers, digging blind beneath millions of tons of water pressing down from above, never entirely sure what the next 100 feet of rock would do. When it finally switched on, it didn't make headlines the way a new stadium or a new casino would. But it may end up mattering more to the future of southern Nevada than anything ever built on the Strip. If Lake Mead ever crosses Deadpool and every other city on the river loses its supply completely, Las Vegas can still pull water from the very bottom of the lake. The city everyone blames first is, on paper, the one most prepared to survive what's coming for everyone else. That's not an accident. It's 20 years of decisions nobody else on the river was willing to make. But surviving isn't the same as solving. Here's the part that should actually stop you. Even if the Rockies had a perfectly normal winter every single year from now on, Lake Mead still wouldn't fully recover, because the river was never carrying enough water to fill the promises made about it in the first place. This isn't a drought the region can simply wait out. The math was broken a century before the drought ever started. Read that again. A normal winter wouldn't fix this, only using less wood. Scientists studying tree rings going back over 1,000 years say the current dry stretch is the worst this region has experienced in all that time, and roughly half of it is being driven by rising temperatures that didn't exist when the deal was signed in 1922. The lake used to sit 330 feet above Deadpool. It has closed more than half that distance in 25 years, and 2026 has been one of the fastest years of decline yet. At that pace, eventually stops being an abstract word and starts becoming a date on a calendar. For decades, Lake Mead looked like an endless reserve. Today, it looks more like a countdown clock built into a canyon wall, climbing higher up the rock with every foot the water gives up. In 2022, Lake Mead exposed a body that had been buried for decades. But that body was never the biggest thing the lake revealed. It revealed that the entire American Southwest had been living on borrowed water all along, spending a savings account that was empty long before anyone was willing to admit it. The ring on the canyon wall isn't going anywhere. It will keep climbing for as long as the withdrawals keep outpacing what the river actually delivers. So the real question isn't whether Las Vegas has enough straws in the lake, or whether new turbines can keep Hoover Dam's lights on a little longer. Those are patches on a system that was never built to survive this. The real question is whether 7 states, 2 countries, and 25 million people can finally agree to take less from a river that has spent over 20 years telling them, as clearly as it possibly can, exactly how much water it actually has left to give.